It's been well over a week since we first heard the news, but the confirmation only came in the last few days. The United States is officially transferring Army troops to the Middle East, potentially for operations against Iran. That's the 82nd Airborne Infantry Division, meaning airborne. This unit is quite famous in American military history, and today you'll find out exactly what it has done so well. The 82nd Airborne Infantry Division, or 82nd Airborne, is a very famous unit in American history. Because its history begins more than a century ago, shortly after the American entry into World War I, the 82nd was created in 1917. This division was stationed, and it was noticed that, among the recruits who made it up, it was composed of people from various National Guard units. They realized that within its ranks there were men from all the states of the United States. At the time, there were 48 states, so each of the states was represented there in that troop unit. And because of that, the division earned the nickname All-American, meaning all of the United States or all of America. And that's why the division symbol, its insignia to this day, is a double A, actually two mirrored A's, which stand for All-American. In 1942, the division received the airborne insignia, which is arched above, but before that, this airborne didn't exist. In June 1918, the division was entirely in France after being transported across the North Atlantic. In 1932, the division was placed on the front line, already taking part in the Saint-Mihiel salient offensive. And in the following month, in October, the division took part in the extremely costly 82nd Division. This 82nd Division cost the 82nd Division about 1,000 fatal casualties until the end of the war, in the following month on the next day, on November 11, 1918. With the end of the war in Europe, in 1919 the division returned to the United States and was demobilized. However, it remained non-existent for less than 2 years, because in 1921 it was reestablished, this time as a kind of organized reserve. What does that mean? The 82nd Division started to exist as a kind of corps, a hard corps, made up only of officers and, that's right, enlisted men. And in this format, it remained throughout the 1920s and also the 1930s, until, at the end of the 1930s, the division started to grow in numbers again, due to the military emergency in Europe. But the 82nd was only really reestablished on March 25, 1942, with the United States already firmly involved in World War II. On that day, the division was placed under the command of none other than General Omar Bradley. And Bradley took the division to its permanent home, which is Fort Bragg in North Carolina. By the way, to this day, the 82nd is still stationed at Fort Bragg. But, as I told you, since the division up to that point was a very small corps, it had to be completed, reinforced, rehabilitated, reinforced. That's why rehabilitated, and that's it. Once rehabilitated, it was assigned. The new 82nd, and precisely with this transfer of officers, 3 officers who would make their mark not only on the history of the unit, but also on the United States Army as a whole for the next 2 decades. Who were these 3 men? The future generals, Matthew Ridgway, James Gavin, and also Maxwell Taylor. So you'll notice that these 3 guys have a name that's very closely linked to the airborne troops, which are the American Airborne Paratrooper units. And then, on August 15, 1942, Omar Bradley decided to turn the 82nd into the 1st Airborne Division of the United States Army. So it was filled with troops and then later transformed into an airborne division. So, what's the difference between an airborne division, an airmobile division, and a true paratrooper division? Like, for example, the German Fallschirmjäger, the airborne division, or the airmobile division. It has both parachute regiments, which are the regiments that will be dropped by parachute, and also glider regiments. Because at the time, due to the lack of helicopters as an operational weapon, troops could be inserted directly onto the battlefield with gliders. In the absence of helicopters, then, only with gliders. For example, you can deliver a howitzer or an artillery piece or a cannon or a heavy machine gun, anything like that, to any point on the battlefield. So, what are we going to see next then? With the training phase completed, the 82nd Division is transferred to the Mediterranean, where the Allies were just finishing conquering North Africa from the hands of the 1st Italo-German Army, which is the successor of the Afrika Korps. So on July 9, 1943, the 82nd Division carried out the first operational American parachute jump in history against the Italian island of Sicily. A regiment of the 82nd was dropped there in the south of Sicily near Catania. And on September 13, a few days after the landing on the continent, the landing at Salerno in Italy, another regiment would also be dropped by parachute over the combat area. The 82nd then remained as a frontline division in Italy for the entire following year. Let's say from September 1943 until the summer of 1944, because it will take part in all the battles of the Gustav Line, which will wear down the Allies for the next 6 months after the invasion until May 1944. And one of its regiments, in fact, will be used at the Anzio Bridgehead. So at the Anzio Bridgehead, this regiment will stay there, stuck on the beach as well from January until May 1944, when the Americans will finally break through the German lines, dismantle the defensive scheme of the 10th and 14th German armies, and capture Rome. But shortly after that, the 82nd is completely removed from the Mediterranean to be sent to England because it will be prepared for Operation Overlord or the invasion of Normandy. We've already talked a lot about Operation Overlord here, but it's worth noting that the airborne component, the paratrooper component, was quite large. We have the 2 American divisions being dropped at the far western end of the combat area on the Cotentin Peninsula. So they were dropped there. On the night of June 5th to 6th, the actual drop of the paratroopers happened in the first minutes of the early morning of June 6th, 1944. And although it was carried out with extreme disorganization, it was the largest night jump in military history, and also the last one, because the disorganization was immense, the chaos was immense. The paratroopers of the 82nd, a group of them, managed to liberate the first European city in that operation, which was the small town of Saint-Mère-Église. It also became famous in the series Band of Brothers, although the series focuses on the 101st Division, and not the 82nd Division. Very well then. After that, the 82nd Division remained in combat in the Cotentin region for 33 consecutive days. We even visited, during our Normandy expedition, we visited the command post of General James Gavin, who at the time was the deputy commander of the unit, there near the Meurthe River, close to Saint-Mère-Église. But the following 33 days, man, the 82nd Division earned its first Medal of Honor, which was awarded to Private Charles de Glopper, including a posthumous medal because de Glopper was killed in action on June 9th. And in the 33 days it remained in action, it suffered no less than 5,245 total casualties, including killed, wounded, and missing, a number that represents approximately 46% casualties for the division. It's a testament to the ferocity of the fighting against the Germans in that area of Normandy. Shortly after that, the 82nd as well as the 101st would be pulled back to England for a period of rest and also to recover their strength. And they would only be sent back to the front line on September 17, 1944, in the famous Operation Market Garden. It was on this occasion that the 82nd would make its last jump in World War II, being dropped in the region of the Nijmegen Bridge over in the Netherlands, which is the second bridge to be captured by the 30th Army Corps, as it moved up the Dutch road towards the north of Germany. Very well. Many people today say it's the fault of General James Gavin, who took command of the division in the last days of operations in Normandy, and was the youngest division commander in the United States Army. At 37 years old, James Gavin was said to be mainly responsible for the failure to capture the Nijmegen Bridge in the early hours of the operation. And, therefore, the halt of the offensive will happen right there, and only on September 20th, 3 days after the start of the operation. It is the 82nd that will carry out an extremely courageous operation, which is the crossing of the Wall River during the day. In plastic boats, rubber boats, those kinds of boats. In fact, this action is shown in the movie A Bridge Too Far, and it's one of the most dramatic moments in the film. In fact, only after this action do the paratroopers manage to capture the Nijmegen Bridge successfully. The division once again will move forward, but not really at the forefront of the fighting, until it was pulled back to France in October or November. But then, on December 16th, the Germans attacked the American vanguards in the Ardennes region, unleashing the famous Battle of the Ardennes, or the Battle of the Ardennes Bulge. And then, as a first action to regain the initiative in that sector, General Eisenhower committed his 2 paratrooper divisions, which were resting, the 82nd and the 101st, to the 2 ends of the front line. While the 101st, as everyone probably already knows, was positioned in the south of the front line to hold the city of Bastogne, the 82nd was positioned in the north of the front line, fighting directly against Kampfgruppe Peiper, led by Joachim Peiper, which was part of the 6th Panzer Army. So, for the next 30 days again, the 82nd is going to dig in there in the Ardennes, will suffer a large number of casualties, but will completely halt the advance of the 6th Panzer Army, led by Sepp. Dietrich Wright, then after that, with the end of winter, the 82nd will be put back on the front line to take part in the conquest of the 82nd. The 82nd is the largest industrial region in Germany, and it's a region that's very important for the war effort. And because of that, it's prioritized by the Allies to be taken. In the end, a pocket of troops forms in the Ruhr Valley, and the 82nd is one of the divisions that will help destroy this pocket of troops. By April, the 82nd is one of the first divisions, one of the first troop sections. There, actually, it will cross the Elbe River and reach the eastern area of Germany, which was already a demarcated area for Soviet occupation. And after the German surrender, in the months, that followed the German surrender, the Americans will finally reach their occupation positions within Berlin starting in July and in September. So from September 1945, the 82nd Division will replace the 2nd American Armored Division, which had been the first American unit to occupy Berlin. And it will stay there in Berlin taking care of West Berlin for 2 months until it is removed in November. The 82nd only returns to the United States in January 1946. And then, here's what happens. There will be a major demobilization of the American Army in the 2 years that followed the end of the war. But the 82nd is chosen to remain in the permanent Army force, and this is made official in 1936 and 48. And then Fort Bragg becomes the permanent home of the 82nd Division. In fact, when the Korean War breaks out in 1950 and the 1st Marine Division, it is surrounded at the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir in December 1950, and President Truman has to mobilize reserves immediately to reinforce the front in Korea, but he doesn't commit the 82nd Division there in Korea. And this decision by Truman is actually continued by Eisenhower. Once Eisenhower takes over the White House at the end of 1952, well, why is that? Because the 82nd Division is considered a strategic reserve of the United States in case of any Soviet action directly carried out by the Red Army. Anywhere in the world, when we talk about a strategic reserve, it means ready deployment. Why? Because the 82nd Division had the shortest deployment time, the smallest window for mobilization. Based on a presidential order for its deployment, it had to move out immediately as soon as it received the presidential order. Therefore, it was not sent to fight in Korea. Then, in the 1950s and 1957, that World War II organization, which is the Organization of Airborne Troop Regiments, it was modified, changed to another nomenclature with a different format, which is the battle group. This new format requires fewer troops and demands greater integration between the infantry, reconnaissance, and artillery services to make the division a bit more agile. However, this new organization is not considered effective or successful. So much so that in 1964, this battle group organization is once again modified and replaced by the brigade organization. So brigades are the organizational format that the division follows to this day. In fact, the entire American Army today is also organized in this way. And then the following year, in April 1965, the 82nd Division, for the first time in the brigade format, is put into combat in the Dominican Republic. They are going to invade the Dominican Republic in a mission that in fact is assisted. The 82nd is assisted by the Brazilian Army through the Brazilian contingent that operated in Santo Domingo in 1965. Shortly after that, when the North Vietnamese and also the Viet Cong launched the Tet Offensive, in January 1968, the 3rd Brigade of the 82nd Division was urgently sent to Vietnam. That, for the first time, this action shows the real mobility capability of the 82nd Division. That, in less than 24 hours after receiving the order from President Lyndon Johnson, was already on its way to Vietnam. So that 3rd Brigade remained in combat in Vietnam during the following months and finally returned to the United States after the end of the Tet Offensive crisis. Then in 1983, in October 1983, on October 25th, the United States invaded the island of Grenada. You can see that it's more than 10 years after the last deployment of the 82nd in Vietnam, the United States would invade the island of Grenada in the Caribbean. And the 82nd is going to be one of the divisions used in this action. This action only lasts a few days. And even though it was a quick victory, it left a bitter taste. Because the different components of the American Armed Forces suffer a lot from communication and coordination difficulties. and that led to a number of casualties that was considered unnecessary for the 82nd Division. About 16 soldiers, when I say soldiers, I mean both sergeants and privates, were killed in action during the invasion of Grenada, and many of those deaths were caused by what is considered a lack of coordination between the forces. This lack of coordination was resolved in the following years. Over the next 3 years, and on December 20-1989, the Americans once again entered combat in the Caribbean and Central America, this time in Operation Just Cause, the invasion of Panama, which took place right at the end of 1989. This time, all the communication problems are resolved. The operation is much smoother for the United States Armed Forces, with a lower number of casualties. And in this operation, there will also be the first combat jump of the 82nd Division since World War II. In other words, in Vietnam and in the invasion of Grenada, the 82nd was not deployed by parachute. The airborne soldiers were taken to the battlefield by planes, the Hercules, the Lockheed C-130. Shortly after the invasion of Panama in '89, less than 2 years later, in 1991, the 82nd was once again in combat there in the Middle East region, starting from the Saudi border to invade Kuwait, which was being occupied by Iraqi troops during Operation Desert Storm. So as you can see on the map, the 82nd was responsible for the most drastic movement of this ground operation by the United States-led coalition. So it was the division that actually had the longest movement, including working together with armored divisions to cut off the escape route of the Iraqi troops that were in Kuwait, right? And then, man, in 2002, that's already in the so-called War on Terror. In 2002, the 82nd was sent to Afghanistan to complete the operations to dismantle the Taliban in Afghanistan between 2002 and 2003. In 2003, the northern invasion of Iraq took place, and therefore, the 82nd was withdrawn from Afghanistan and taken to Iraq to fight Saddam Hussein's troops. And not only in the initial phase, which saw the defeat of the Iraqi army there, but throughout all the following years, until 2011, in the various phases of counterinsurgency operations in Iraq, the 82nd was present there as one of the main forces, American forces in that region, and especially in Iraq. It's also worth mentioning that in 2010, the 82nd was used in an emergency operation in Haiti, right after the major earthquake that struck Haiti, which even killed and injured several members of the Brazilian military mission there. And the soldiers of the 82nd were the ones who arrived in the country and stabilized it, reopening its airport to receive supplies and foreign aid for the Haitian population. What will happen after that? The soldiers of the 82nd will return to Fort Bragg in North Carolina. And as you can see there, the division today is structured as several brigades. These brigades, you have 3 combat brigades, which are completely self-sufficient, these 3 combat brigades. Then, also with, let's say, an artillery brigade, this yellow one you're seeing here in the middle, a brigade the equivalent of an artillery brigade. I say equivalent because there's an X there on top of the symbols on the rectangles, which indicates the size of a brigade. There's a combat aviation brigade with the symbol there for aviation, for rotary wing, for helicopter. And finally, a support brigade, a sustainment brigade, as it's written there, is a logistics support brigade. So, the 82nd Division is divided into brigades today. And it's exactly in this format that one of these brigades, we don't know exactly which one, whether it's the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. And actually, it's not just them. Because it's a brigade combat team, not a regimental team, but a brigade combat team that was assigned to Central Command, the Central Command, over in the Middle East now, for these operations against Iran. So what is a brigade combat team? It's a combat brigade with its support elements, including artillery, aviation, and also logistics. So it's not just one of these three brigades you're seeing here, but also portions of the other three here to support it. As far as we know, it's 3,000 soldiers, not the entire division. However, the entire division can be transferred to the Middle East at any moment. And the 82nd Division will join Marine Expeditionary Groups, Marine Expeditionary units that are already on their way to the Middle East as well. While the Marines move by sea, the 82nd Division moves by air, right? So they end up arriving first in the area of operations. And everyone is confirming, actually not confirming, but considering it. Actually, that's the correct term, that the soldiers of the 82nd are going to be used against Karg Island, which is a small Iranian island located at the very end of the Persian Gulf. And it concentrates a very large number of refineries and also oil distribution infrastructure. So it's estimated that 90% of Iranian oil is refined and distributed there from Karg Island, which has even been the target of precise American attacks. A few days ago, so Trump would have his eyes focused on Karg Island right now, right? So now we just have to wait and see what the next few days will show us about the potential deployment of the 82nd on Karg Island or on other targets in Iran. Now, you tell me if you already knew the story of the 82nd Division, if now you have a better understanding about this unit, which is considered one of those real door kickers by the United States Army. And also, if you think Karg Island is going to be attacked or if it will be another target in Iran, let us know in the comments because I want to know your opinion. If you like this video, don't forget to share it with your friends, but also give us a thumbs up and subscribe to War Room so you don't miss anything else. I'll stop here. Thank you again for watching, and here's a big hug from War Room. See you next time.